Namaskar. In this video, we will be taking you through some of our preliminary findings in dowsing. To dowse is basically to search with the aid of simple handheld tools or instruments. These instruments include Y rods, L rods, and pendulums. By using these instruments, dowsers believe that they are able to find things which are otherwise hidden from view or knowledge. Dowsing has been primarily used for finding water beneath the surface. However, apart from locating water and minerals, dowsing has also been used for other means. For example, using a pendulum, dowsers believe that they can ask questions about a person's life and get yes and no answers depending on the movement of the pendulum after the question is asked to the pendulum. The questions answered with the means of a pendulum are manifold and include questions with regards to relationships, investments, and the authenticity of things, and even asking about the future. We were intrigued by the various beliefs and claims of dowsers on what a pendulum as a dowsing tool can do. So we went about conducting our own study, and this study is still in the preliminary stages of understanding this divination system. These findings are based on the observation and analysis of the experiment, both at a physical level, that is with the use of the intellect, and through advanced sixth sense. Researching the spiritual dimension through one's sixth sense is known as spiritual research. Now, in the experiment that we conducted, we focused on understanding the vibrations emitted by people through the means of the movement of a pendulum when it was hung over them. And we chose 4 groups for this experiment. The first group represented an average person, that is, people with a spiritual level between 20 to 30%. People between the 20 and 30% spiritual level generally do not do any type of spiritual practice. The second group were seekers doing regular spiritual practice and who were considered spiritually positive as they did not have any negative energy problems. The third group were seekers doing regular spiritual practice but who were possessed by negative energies. And finally, we had the privilege of conducting the test on at least 6 saints. Now, on a scale of 0 to 100 in terms of spiritual maturity, merging with God would mean 100%. By saints, we mean people who through their spiritual practice have attained the spiritual level of at least 70%. An average person's spiritual level in the current era is around the 20% mark. We made this categorization of people based on their spiritual level and their spiritual state through advanced sixth sense and from various spiritual healing experiments that we have conducted in the past. The spiritual level of a person is based on many factors and can only be obtained through an advanced sixth sense reading. You may wonder why we took a category of seekers that were possessed in this experiment. Well, the reason was because through spiritual research, we have found that approximately 30%, that's 1 in every 3 people, of the world's population is possessed by these negative energies, and almost all the time without the person's knowledge. We saw to it that the person holding the pendulum or the person dowsing had to be a person not affected by negative energies and of a good spiritual level. The spiritual level of the dowser chosen for this experiment was 60%. This was so because through spiritual research, we found that they would be most likely to pick up subtle vibrations of the subject with the help of a pendulum. A spiritually average person would not be able to pick up subtle vibrations and could easily be influenced by negative energies trying to manipulate the experiment. We also took all care to stabilize the hand of the dowser so that imperceptible movements of the hand or fingers of the dowser would be eliminated from influencing the experiment. At first we checked for any vibrations affecting the pendulum when the dowser held the pendulum in the place designated for the experiment, and we found that there were none. Then one at a time we asked each seeker from the sample that we had chosen to sit on a chair, and the seeker who was dowsing to hang a pendulum over their head and observe if there was any movements. We tested for this movement at different heights at 3 feet intervals. Now, as the experiment proceeded, we observed different aspects of the motion of the pendulum. The direction of the pendulum, that is whether it was clockwise or anti-clockwise, steady or haphazard. The second was how far above the seeker's head did the vibrations continue to affect the pendulum. And using the ashram staircase, we were able to test this up to 41 feet. The speed with which the pendulum moved and the distance the pendulum traversed from its central axis. As you can see, we have an entire crew involved in the camera work and seekers with advanced sixth sense who tell us what happens in the spiritual dimension when the experiment takes place. I would like to now take you through an example of the observations we recorded. The first example was that of an average person. If you recall, this is a person between the 20 and 30% spiritual level, which is the same as the majority of the world's population. As you can see from the table, the first column has the different height intervals. The second column shows the movement of the pendulum at the corresponding height. And as you can see from the readings, there is no specific trend in the direction of the pendulum. In the last column, we have shown the distance the pendulum traveled from its axis in terms of the diameter of the oscillation. The two predominant observations over here were that, with the exception of the first reading that is taken at 1 foot, the pendulum hardly moved away from its central axis. The movements were so feeble as they ranged from 0.3 centimeters to 1 centimeter in diameter. In fact, we had trouble recognizing whether it was moving clockwise or anti-clockwise. Now, the reason for this feeble movements was that the strength of the spiritual vibrations emitting from the person was very low. The rotation was sometimes clockwise and at other times anti-clockwise. Now, the reason for this haphazard direction observed was due to the fluctuating mental state of the subject. The second example we'll be looking at is that of a person who was possessed. The whole experiment was ticking along like normal when all of a sudden the possessing entity manifested and began to have a subtle battle with the dowser. It is for this reason that we stress that the dowser should be of a good spiritual level, that is of at least 60%. A dowser of a lower spiritual level can get badly affected in a subtle battle such as this. This is because the negative energy would shoot through the pendulum and enter into the dowser. At SSRF, to the best of our knowledge, we have the largest library in the world of video footage on all types of demonic possession, right from the common ghost to the highest level negative energies that are mantrics. The pendulum moved erratically throughout the experiment. At times, the pendulum would move in a clockwise manner, and at other times it would move in an anti-clockwise manner, and sometimes it would be steady. What we realized out here was that we were actually measuring the vibrations of the possessing entity as opposed to the seeker. When we saw the same event through advanced sixth sense, it was actually this higher level possessing entity that was manipulating how the pendulum moved. Now this is a table of readings taken of the seeker who was possessed, and as you can see in the middle column, the direction of the pendulum had no set direction. Compared to the readings obtained from an average person, we have two main differences out here. The first and most obvious one was that there was manifestation in the case of the possessed seeker. In the case of the average person, the pendulum went steady only after 18 feet, where the vibrations could not be felt anymore. However, in the case of the possessed seeker, the fluctuations in direction indicated a subtle battle that was happening between the dowser and the possessing entity. Here you can see the possessing entity trying to cover the pendulum with negative energy. Now the reason that this entity had to manifest and be exposed was because it was forced to fight the positivity of the dowser flowing through the pendulum. And when the pendulum was steady, it meant that the negativity from the possessing entity was an equal amount with the positivity coming from the dowser. In our next episode, we will be sharing with you how this happens and the dynamics in the subtle dimension between the dowser, the possessing entity, the subject, and the pendulum. Now this is the important part that will relate back to you. If the dowser does not have advanced sixth sense, it is improbable that he would realize that the subject was possessed. And this is especially so if the possessing entity is a higher level mantric. In such a case, the dowser, mostly being of an average spiritual level, gets attacked by the possessing entity without his or her knowledge. Quite often we innocently try dowsing on another person, but little do we know the dynamics that come into play in the spiritual dimension, especially if the subject is possessed. Now in the above example, the entity manifested and we all became aware of the unusual behavior. Most of the time a possessed person behaves normally, and the possessing entity may not manifest but instead lurks behind the person's consciousness, spewing black energy on anyone who chooses to interact with that person. That's all we have for you in this episode. But before we go, let's recap some of the key findings. Now, many of us watching this video have probably experimented with dowsing, but have never thought of the various factors that come into play when we get our answers. With respect to understanding vibrations emitted by a person, unless one has advanced sixth sense, one cannot tell the reason behind the movement of the pendulum. Nor can one tell the spiritual state of the person whose reading is being taken. This then provides a dilemma to most dowsers. Due to the lack of spiritual practice, there is less intensity of vibrations from an average person. Now, if the subject is possessed, then one may think that the vibrations are from the subject, when in fact they are actually from the possessing entity. We will continue to explore the system of dowsing and will provide our findings to you in subsequent videos. I do hope this video for you has opened up different perspectives on dowsing and that you are better informed on the subtle aspects. Thank you for joining us.